Alright, Ronan MMA, welcome back to the channel. Now in today's video, I want to talk about 5 rising stars that essentially fell off, at the very least, in terms of their hype. Okay, these are guys that either the UFC pushed a little too quickly, had a host of lackluster performances, or were just unbelievably unlikable on the mic. Guys that potentially could have been massive superstars and just couldn't quite cut it. Now, I'm going to start with number 5 and work my way down, and I'm going to tell you right now, number 1 on my list, technically, hasn't happened yet, and I think is going to be a bit of a hot take. It's essentially a prediction I think a lot of people are going to disagree with, so stick around for that. But let us start right away with number 5 on my list, and that is Edmen Shahbazyan. Now, this dude came in, and he was on the rise pretty quickly. He was also very, very young, right? The UFC was absolutely trying to push him. He had the push from Ronda Rousey, as his head coach was Ronda Rousey's head coach, and Ronda was constantly tweeting about him whenever he would fight and things like that. He was getting quite a bit of attention, right? Now, he got a contract off of the Contender Series back in 2018, and the dude came into the UFC and went on a 4-fight win streak and capped that off with a stunning head kick finish over Brad Tavares. Okay, such a perfectly executed head kick. Might be one of my most favorite head kick finishes of all time, still to this day.
To this day! To this day!
Okay, at such a young age, over a battle-tested vet like Brad Tavares, increased his hype significantly, especially during that fight. Ronda Rousey's tweeting about him, Joe Rogan's talking about him, and all the rest of it, right? As per usual, what the UFC does, right? They give him a vet, even more so than Brad Tavares, a bit more of a gatekeeper type vet in Derek Brunson, okay? Now, the fight started off relatively well for Edmen Shahbazyan, but much like the next guy on this list, could not keep up and just eventually shit the bed, and that is exactly what happened here. As I said, the fight started off relatively good, but Derek Brunson wouldn't just go away. Do you know what I mean? And then at the end of the second round, Derek Brunson's on top of Edmen Shahbazyan, beating the ever-living shit out of him. Fight probably could have been stopped at the end of the second, but it wasn't. I think that was Herb Dean, if I could be mistaken, but I don't think I am. Either way, dude. Goes into the third, stopped there shortly thereafter, TKO. Now, ever since then, immediately he lost to Jack Hermanson right after that, Nasruddin Imavov. He got one win in between those, and then lost to Anthony Hernandez. Now, a once young, promising prospect who had the push from Ronda Rousey, the UFC, Joe Rogan, and everybody else, has gone 1-4 in his last 5, getting finished in 3 of those losses. Do you know what I mean? All by TKO, so not all that great. And he is still young, right? So this is not a great thing to see from a guy who's essentially in his mid to late 20s, okay? It's just not great. But regardless, dude, again, once upon a time, looked very promising, could have potentially been a star, was getting the push. Maybe they pushed him a little bit too quickly, giving him Derek Brunson, who, while was at, relatively the end of his career, wasn't done yet, okay? Now, moving up to number 4 on my list, which is one of my countrymen, unfortunately, Mike fucking Malott, okay? This could have been Canada's guy, which we haven't had one since George St. Pierre and Rory McDonald, okay? Probably because our country in the last decade or so has become a little soy, and we don't necessarily encourage violent sports whatsoever, unfortunately, but that's neither here nor there, okay? Now, he went on a good win streak after getting a contract from the Contender Series, much like Edmen Shahbazyan, where he finished a guy by guillotine, came in and went 3-0, 3 finishes. The dude is a finishing machine, or at the very least was up until his last fight. Now, the UFC gave him a spotlight slot, okay, on the Toronto pay-per-view, UFC 297. They haven't been to Toronto in 6 fucking years. This is Mike Malott's hometown, dude. This fight was basically tailor-made to create a star in his own hometown, like I just said, right? Fight started off good, just like Edmen Shahbazyan. He won the first essentially 2 3/4 rounds, was beating Neil Magny on the feet, beating him on the ground. For some fucking reason, though, couldn't last another 20 seconds, right? Literally within the last few seconds, I believe there was 15 seconds left on the clock, Neil Magny reverses him and is able to dish out more damage to Mike Malott than Mike Malott was able to dish out throughout the entire fucking fight. Now, a fight IQ problem, maybe because he was piecing Neil Magny up on the feet, but for some reason really wanted to get that arm triangle, was jumping into submission before he even had the position secured, and that was what ultimately caused him to get reversed, but he basically gave up, or at the very least that's what it looked like. Maybe he was more hurt than I realized, maybe he was more hurt than a lot of people realized, but got finished by an old man, Neil Magny, who had not finished a guy in 6 fucking years. Do you know what I mean? This guy, as I said, this was a tailor-made fight for him. They wanted him to blow up in Canada, in his hometown. Canada doesn't have a lot of big stars, and he fucking shit the bed. Do you know what I mean? It was a little disappointing, I'll be honest. Now, hopefully he can make a turnaround, although he's a little old to be this young in his career. I believe he's in his 30s already, and he's also pretty small for welterweight. I think he should go back down to lightweight, but that's just me, dude. Now, moving to number 3 on my list, Paddy the Baddy Pimblett. Okay, now this dude has won 5 straight in the UFC, but despite that, in my opinion at the very least, has lost a vast majority of his hype that came herewith, okay? Or that he came here with, pardon me. Dude, I don't know why I said it all weird. The robbery win over Jared Gordon fucked everything up for Paddy Pimblett, by the way, and not just the robbery win itself, but the way he handled himself after the fact. Completely delusional, asking for fight of the night when it wasn't that exciting of a fight. It was actually shit, if I'm being brutally fucking honest. Then goes back in the post-fight press conference, talks about how it wasn't even close. He even said that in the octagon with Joe Rogan. People are, he was talking shit. It was unbelievably delusional, okay? Unbelievably delusional. And by the way, this wasn't even one of those instances where a guy gets pushed too quickly. Jared Gordon, while he is good, is not a high-ranked individual. He probably, with all due respect, won't ever be. I like the guy. I like watching him fight. But he's also a little older in his career, and I don't think that he's going to be top 15, top 10 material. And that's just me, dude. Maybe I'm wrong, but who knows? Do you know what I mean? This is a guy who the level of skill should have been, if Paddy Pimblett was who a lot of people thought he was, should have been no problem. But it wasn't that, all right? And then not just that, he's out for a good long while because he injures himself in that fight. And then he gets a win over Tony Ferguson, who has lost 6 in a row, been finished in a few of them, and the ones that he wasn't finished in was dominated essentially. And I'm talking brutal finishes, dude. We're talking a disgusting beatdown from the hands of Justin Gaethje. We're talking Charles Oliveira, Beneil Dariush, neither finished him. Both of them tore his shit up. Charles Oliveira almost broke his arm. Beneil Dariush shredded his knee. Then we got Michael Chandler absolutely killing him. Do you know what I mean? And then everything thereafter. Nate Diaz even subbed him, for fuck's sakes. Do you know what I mean? Paddy Pimblett, a young guy, young and hungry. Not like a lot of the guys that Tony Ferguson had been facing. Again, on a 6-fight skid. Couldn't finish him. And honestly, dude, I'll be fair. He looked very impressive in the first round. He hurt Tony. Almost got him out of there. After that, the rest of the fight wasn't all that impressive, if I'm being honest. This is just my opinion. Maybe you disagree, but regardless, dude, if you go back and watch that fight, it kind of looks like the old Paddy, like the Paddy that fought Jared Gordon, where his chin's right up in the fucking air, striking sloppy, pardon me. He's getting hit with shit that maybe he probably shouldn't be. Guys that, there's other guys that don't get hit by the same shots from Tony Ferguson. And in the third round, he completely gassed, which is insane to see from a young guy who looked to be in great shape at the very least in the cage, not a week after, but regardless, dude. Gassed at the end of the fight. Could have even maybe potentially been finished if Tony Ferguson had a little bit left in him, but wasn't the case. But again, considering the guy had lost 6 in a row, is definitely at the end of his career. This was basically, much like Mike Malott, tailor-made matchup for Paddy Pimblett to get back in the good graces of the fans. And he wasn't really able to all that much. Now, as I said earlier, the way that he handled the Jared Gordon loss, I think, is what fucked all this up for him. And while he still has a pretty sizable fan base, pretty sizable social media following, and all the rest of it, I think the amount of people that actually watch him now because they like him, the amount of people that are excited about watching him fight has shrunk significantly. I think that a lot of people are now watching him in the hopes that they one day get to see him flatline on the canvas. Although, like Cody Garbrandt said, dude, sorcerers don't get knocked out.
He says he's a sorcerer. They don't get knocked out.
Okay. Paddy Pimblett went to Hogwarts School for Witchcraft and Wizardry, so who knows, maybe we'll never see him knocked out, but regardless, dude, let's move up to number 2 on my list, Darren fucking Till, okay? This guy had so much hype behind him at one point in time, it was insane, and to be honest, there was decent enough reason for him to have this hype. I'll go over it just a little bit. Now, he was undefeated for 6 fights in the UFC, one of which was a draw, to be fair, but still. Looked very promising at one point in time. Finished Donald Cowboy Cerrone in the first round. Brutally, too, by the way. That was nasty. And then he went to a controversial decision over he won a controversial decision, over Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, who at the time was like the top contender. The guy who went to 2, I think they were both majority draws, or maybe one was a majority decision with Tyron Woodley. Unbelievably close fights. Do you know what I mean? With the current champion. And still beats highly ranked guys to this day.
To this day. To this day.
Right? He was a top contender at that time for sure, but even still today, a win over Stephen Wonderboy Thompson is a good win, right? The UFC, in my opinion, after this kind of rushed Till into a title shot, but like I said, dude, let's be fair. A win over Wonderboy Thompson, whether or not you think he won, because it was a hometown judge scenario, and a lot of people thought that Wonderboy maybe should have gotten the nod. I would have to go back and rewatch it to give a strong opinion on that, but it was close regardless, right? Considering how close Wonderboy's fights were with Tyron Woodley, and then you see Darren Till go out there and actually get a clean ish W over over Wonderboy Thompson, you could kind of understand why the UFC is trying to push this guy, right? But nevertheless, still rushed. And 1,000,000%, by the way, the UFC wanted Woodley gone, and I think that might have played into them pushing him as quickly as they did, because Darren Till had a massive fan base, massive following behind him, walkouts that were reminiscent of an early Conor McGregor, with the whole crowd singing his song behind him, right? But, the UFC wanted Woodley gone, as I said. Dude's whiny as fuck, entitled. He's a race baiter. He would often, he would put on boring performances pretty frequently, right? There were a few finishes that he got. Obviously, when he knocked out Robbie Lawler to win the title. Obviously, when he finished Darren Till in this fight. But the ones in between, not all that great. And he also was not a draw in terms of pay-per-views. The fans didn't like him a whole lot, mostly because of the reasons I just mentioned, right? He would complain about the amount of money that he'd make, even when the UFC was doing him favors, objectively speaking, like putting him as the co-main event as a championship, defending champion, with pay-per-view points on a Conor McGregor card like 205, dude. One of the biggest selling pay-per-view events of all fucking time. But either way, dude, Tyron Woodley ran through Darren Till like he was fucking nothing, almost, right? Dropped him with I believe it was a counter right hand off of a lazy lead uppercut, straight left combination from Darren Till, which he didn't disguise all that well. It was a little lazy. As I said, lead uppercut. Whole front of his face is completely exposed. Once he got hit, dropped him on the ground. You could tell that he did not have much experience in the grappling department, and after Woodley beat him down a little bit, he slyly locked up a Darce choke that Till seemingly had no fucking clue about, had no idea it was there, didn't know what was happening, and just eventually had to tap, right? But ever since then, dude, Darren Till, as I said, once a very promising prospect. The UFC wanted him to be champ. They gave him the push. He was undefeated in the UFC, beat Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, finished Cowboy Cerrone. Then after Woodley, dude, gets starched by fucking Jorge Masvidal, okay? He goes up and he fights Kelvin Gastelum. He gets a split decision victory in a very boring performance, and then after that has lost, in total, 5 of his last 6. He's been finished in 3 of those, submitted by the current champion, Dricus du Plessis, and then ever since then he's dipped out. And now, dude, Darren Till's selling his clothes online because G-Star Raw or whatever the fuck sued his ass, because I guess he didn't check to make sure that his branding wouldn't be breaking any patent laws or anything like that, which is also a little stupid. But either fucking way, dude, Darren Till's hype completely erased and, all over his goddamn ACL, okay? Now, moving up to number 1 on the list. Now, as I said, this might be a little controversial. This is more of a prediction, although I do think to a certain extent a lot of his mystique has vanished, and I will talk about that right now. Now, Khamzat Chimaev, okay? As I said, I think the mystique for Khamzat Chimaev is essentially gone, or at the very least has been gone for me, and I think a large swath of the fan base, since the Gilbert Burns fight. When this dude came in, the hype around him was unfucking believable. And like I said, it hasn't technically happened yet. He's still undefeated. He just came off of a victory over Kamaru Usman, which I don't think was a victory, but either fucking way, dude. When he came into the UFC, the guy, 2 finished victories, 2 different weight classes in 10 fucking days, okay? That's impressive no matter which way you slice it. Even though the guys that he was facing off against weren't necessarily the best competition, neither of them are in the UFC currently, and I don't think they were even for very much longer after Khamzat Chimaev got through with them, got finished with them. But, and then he goes and he starches Gerald Meerschaert, and then he goes and he fucking runs through Li Jingliang like he's literally fucking nothing, okay? And then he fights Gilbert Burns. And there are a lot of people to this day that still believe Khamzat Chimaev lost that fight to Gilbert Burns. I, for one, wasn't all that upset with the decision. I think there is a decent argument for Gilbert Burns taking round 3 based on those massive overhand rights that he was landing over and over and over again, okay? But after that, he gets a bounce-back victory over Kevin Holland, which was a little bit of an odd situation. Do you know what I mean? Like, very short notice. Khamzat didn't make weight. Allegedly, the doctors told him to stop. Allegedly, the UFC switched this shit around without letting the public know. So Khamzat kind of took the rap for it. Whatever, dude, right? He gets through Kevin Holland as expected. But then takes a very long fucking time to move up to middleweight, right? And we've already seen now large gaps in his career because the first 2 victories were both in July. He gets another one 2 months later in September, and then we don't see him for another 13 months. And that was when he fought the Leech. And then we don't see him for another, 6 months or so, and then another. So his activity has fallen off. And then after that Kevin Holland victory, again, we don't see him for another 13 months until he's fighting Kamaru Usman on 10 days notice in Abu Dhabi. Kamaru Usman has to go from fucking Florida to Abu Dhabi 10 days notice, who's not a middleweight, by the way. Khamzat Chimaev just spent the last year bulking up, allegedly, to middleweight. He goes out there and gasses after the first round, and in my opinion, Kamaru Usman wins round 2 and rounds 3, and you could even argue against a 10-8 for Khamzat Chimaev in round 1, as he did not do a whole lot of damage. Did he dominate that round in the grappling? Absolutely. Did he threaten with the choke? A little bit, but he wasn't ever really close to finishing the fight. I don't know if I would score it a 10-8. I would have to watch it back a little bit more closely, but regardless, dude, he got the nod. But because of that performance and the performance over Gilbert Burns, people soon realized he's not going to be able to just run through the top guys, which a lot of people once thought that he would be able to, based on how he was beating guys like the evil Chinese man Jingling.
Evil Chinese man and Jingling is Asian.
Based on how he was beating guys like Gerald Mearshart and what have you, even though they're not very highly ranked. Khamzat Chimaev, dude. Some of it's bad luck, but some of it also, in my opinion, is people overestimating his abilities. He's human, dude. Do you know what I mean? But also, he got beat up by COVID. Now it looks like he's got fucking shingles. I don't know. He also hangs out with some very shady characters, and I'm not talking about Kadyrov, dude. I'm talking about, a PDF apologist, what have you. But besides all that, his fight hype, in my opinion, or at the very least for me, and I think a large swath of the fan base, is essentially gone. I don't think that there's any crazy expectations put on him, although I think he was a victim at one point of crazy expectations. I don't mean to call him a victim, but people put all these crazy expectations on you to the point where it's impossible for you to even meet that standard. Do you know what I mean? So, Khamzat Chimaev, in my opinion, his hype's gone. I don't think that if they give him a top middleweight, I don't see many top middleweights that I could see him beating, if I'm being brutally fucking honest. I think the size difference, the strength difference, I think that the cardio is a real fucking issue. And when you're fighting guys that are actually middleweights, guys that cut down from 20 pounds plus heavier than what Kamaru Usman cuts down from, I think they're going to be a real fucking problem for you. Do you know what I mean? So I don't know that we see Khamzat Chimaev ever actually touch UFC gold, and that's why I think that his hype kind of died down. But either way, dude, let me know if you disagree with that take or not in the comments below. I would greatly appreciate it. Like and subscribe. I would greatly appreciate that as well. I will see you at the next video. Bye-bye.